Thank you, Bob. All right, we're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 7, and we're going to look at the first 11 verses, and then we're going to skip and look at 21 through 23. I tell my class all the time, don't ask me why the text is separated the way it is or how it's chosen. Standard Publishing chooses this, not me. So it's a little it's always a strange to me, the pericope, whenever you start skipping verses in a passage, but that's what we do here. But Jeremiah chapter 7, let's talk a little bit of context before we read it. And this is around 608 BC. This is a prophet named Jeremiah who's going to give what kind of amounts to a sermon, really. And he is going to have a very tough assignment, which is he is going to stand at the temple gate, and as worshipers come in, he's going to tell them that their religion was a sham. That's a fun responsibility. Like, hey, good morning. Your religion is a sham. Come on in. But this is actually a pretty famous sermon in the Bible, maybe one of the most famous Old Testament sermons. It's right up there, I think, Old Testament-wise, with the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament. Actually, Jesus refers to the sermon. He talks about it in Mark chapter 11. And it is sandwiched between the fall of the Assyrian Empire, which had wiped out northern Israel, and the rise of the Babylonian Empire, which is going to take Judah into captivity. And this is a pretty turbulent time in Judah's history, and yet they don't fully grasp the challenge of the situation. They don't really understand. They really feel a sense of security, and they had rooted a lot of that security in the idea of the temple is just fine. We've got the temple. As long as we have the temple, then we're fine. So that's the context. Let's read the text. We're in Jeremiah chapter 7, starting in verse 1. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house, and there proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. If you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. Will you steal and murder and commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal and follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we are safe? Safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? Skip down to verse 21. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Go ahead, add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifices, and eat the meat yourselves. For when I brought your ancestors out of Egypt and spoke to them, I did not just give them commands about burnt offerings and sacrifices, but I gave them this command: obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in obedience to all I command, that it may go well with you. All right. If you take a peek at verse 4, we're going to walk through this a little bit, kind of verse by verse. But if you look at verse 4, he is talking about this phrase that apparently they had sort of said in this rote way and found security in. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord. And I wanted to start by asking this discussion question, and that is, they seem to have this like routine or this ritual that makes them feel maybe kind of secure. And I wonder if there are phrases or maybe even Bible verses that people recite in a rote way and find security in, but maybe don't fully grasp their meaning. Can you think of an example like that where someone has this kind of similar idea, a word or a phrase that we just sort of say in a rote way? Don't judge. I was thinking of the old CFC Guide, Guard, and Direct Us. Yeah, we're going to build a hedge around something. Traveling mercies maybe is another phrase that I've heard. Ready recollection. Yeah, I've said that. I've said that in myself, and to be honest with you, I'm not even sure what that means. You know, as I'm about to eat my McDonald's, bless this to my body, Lord. He's like, listen, I can only do so much. Yes. But I just wanted to bring that up. We're going to talk more about that in a second. I wanted to bring that up because it does kind of set the context of, we do sort of get in these little religious ruts and this phraseology and these ideals that we feel like will somehow keep us sort of safe. It's almost like our little ritual that you know, I've done my little ritual, I feel okay. I think that's to an extreme what's happening here. But again, let's dig into the text. Let's kind of walk. We're going to look at, not quite verse by verse. Let's look at the first 4 verses here again. We're in Jeremiah chapter 7. Jeremiah chapter 7. All right, this is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house, and there proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. So this is literally like there's a gate where people are coming in to the temple in order to worship. And that gate is not just an entryway. I think when we think of gates, we think of like almost like a military, like a checkpoint, where we think of like turnstiles, maybe even, you know, going into a stadium. But the gate for the ancient Near East was a place of business. It was a place of judgment. You know, this is where if some edict was going to be proclaimed, this is where you go. You go to the gate and you tell people as they come through. So going to the gate is more than just a practical thing. It's symbolic, where this is where you make these kind of proclamations. And so God's trying to maximize the uncomfortableness of this message by putting it right smack in the middle of everything. Look at the text again. It says, verse 3, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says, reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. And then he says, do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, and repeats that 3 times. So again, this is like a chant that they've somehow adopted. This is like a mantra that they've had, and they've completely missed the point. They think because God has said, this is where I will meet you, as long as that place continues to exist, then they're fine. Then they're good to go. God has to meet them there, no matter how they live. This is what he's promised. This is what he has to do, no matter how we live. And I think there was a couple of things happening there. One, it was a complete misunderstanding of the covenant that God made with David all the way back in 2 Samuel chapter 7. But I think just as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, I already mentioned that some like 70-something years before this, you had the northern kingdom falling to the Assyrians. What specifically didn't happen when that happened is Jerusalem does not fall. In fact, it does not fall in kind of a miraculous way because of God's intervention. And you could see, if you're living in southern Judah, and you see that happen in northern Israel, and you see that was spared at your doorstep, you're feeling pretty confident. Like, that's the worst case scenario. You have this, which I tell my Bible class, we talk about this all the time. You have the Babylonian captivity, which was bad, but Assyrians were much, much worse. Whereas Babylonians wanted to, remember the story of Daniel and that whole story? Daniel is in Babylon specifically because what the Babylonians would do is identify up and coming and people who were worthwhile and take them back to Babylon and incorporate them into their life. Assyrians would never do that. They would just kill everybody. Anyone who's a man, they get put to death. All the women and children are made slaves, and they're scattered all throughout the Mediterranean. The Syrians were brutal, brutal people. And when the most brutal people that you know are kind of at your doorstep, but they don't harm you, that's going to give you a lot of confidence. And that's kind of what happened with southern Judah. Jerusalem is just fine. God's not going to let anything happen to his temple, which, by the way, that's the other thing that's in Jerusalem that northern Israel doesn't have. They don't have the temple. And so we have the temple. There's a lot of confidence in that. Look at that phrase, though. Do not trust in deceptive words. that is this idea that they are also getting a false reality. We talked about this last week for those of you who are in my class, where it wasn't just that Jeremiah is having to prophesy in a time where people weren't really willing to listen to him. It's he's having to prophesy in a time where there's lots of prophets saying lots of things, and most of those people are saying, you guys are fine. Keep doing what you're doing. There was kind of a health and wealth, the Old Testament equivalent of health and wealth gospel. There was kind of that message for a lot of those prophets. They're like, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the people that are saying that God is somehow angry with you. That's not true at all. It's that, itching ears type of philosophy. And so they're listening to a lot of that. And you have basically this, it reminds me a little bit of having a security system that's all wired in your house, and you can turn it on and you can turn it off, but it actually isn't connected to anything. It could go off, no one's coming, but it makes you feel better because I have this security system. That is these people that are living in Jerusalem going into the temple, that they're punching in their code and the alarm comes on and they feel good, and God is saying you shouldn't feel that way. All right. Well, that's what I want to ask. Joe, you beat me to the punch, because first question I have is, are there, again, mantras or phrases that we repeat, like this little temple chant, that make us feel secure, that maybe don't actually lead to much change? Go ahead.
God's got me. I mean, some of us, it's true, but some of us just use it because we're still a little hungover before we get to church.
I ask no follow-ups, Larry. Go ahead.
God will provide. God will provide.
Yeah, I think that as a church leader, that's a kind of can be a popular one where we're off the hook, because God will make it happen. Go ahead. I think it could be. I think that the idea that lots of people believe in heaven, but far fewer believe in hell. Mm-hmm. What about? So those are kind of phrases. What about buildings or programs or traditions that are sources of false security? Do we have those? Anyone care to identify one of those?
Baptism doesn't have to necessarily be just because you got done. Does not mean you can change.
Ooh, that's a loaded one there, Paul. He said baptism could be one where just because you got dunked doesn't mean there's change there. It is a ritual, right, that could be disconnected from true heart change or understanding what's happening, maybe even. In fact, a story that I tell sometimes, there was a church that I knew a lot of their ministers, and they were telling me a story about they had a women's center that was right across the street. So they did it was like a halfway house. So they did a lot of work with the women who were coming through there, and they would do a lot of evangelism to them. And there was a time where one of them they were asking if she wanted to be baptized. She agreed to be baptized, and they're in the baptistry, they're getting her ready, and they're telling her, this is what you can wear, and if you need to take off anything you don't want to get wet. And they were explaining it to her, and she had this weird look on her face, and they were like, you seem like confused. And she's like, wait, she's like, I'm going into the water? They were like, yes. And she was like, I'm so confused. And what had happened is they had told her she needed to be baptized. No one explained what that really meant. They just said, this is something you have to do. And she was like, okay, I have to do that. And she had no idea it had to do with water. She knew nothing. It was just that word. You said, I have to do this. And so I'm doing it. And now when you're explaining it to me, I'm like, hold up, what? It was like a meaningless act for her. And so I think I say that to reinforce maybe what you're saying. Any other? Go ahead, Jill.
I have a question. Are you talking about using these phrases without any faith or belief
It could be, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the idea is it's something that is ritualistic, or in this case, the word or phrase, but it is something that doesn't actually let me encounter God. It almost stands in place of that. That because I'm doing this, I feel like I've encountered God, when in reality it's false security.
I've heard a word on the idea of do not take the name of the Lord in vain. Not swearing, but claiming to be of God, but having a life that denies everything about a relationship with God.
Yeah, which I think is, that's happening on a national level here for the people living in Judah. That exact thing is they're claiming to come into the temple and worship a holy God, but nothing about their lifestyle would suggest that's actually happening. Let's keep reading. Look at verse 5. Again, we're in Jeremiah chapter 7. He says, if you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly. And then he goes off to list a number of other things. If you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless or the widow. If you do not shed innocent blood in this place. If you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I give your ancestors forever and ever. So one of the tricks of Bible interpretation is you can see the argument that the other person is making by reading what argument this is making. Because what I can hear is, I can hear them saying prior to this, then he's made a promise that we get to live in this place. He's made a promise that our ancestors will live in this place. And that's true forever and ever. And he's saying, well, if. That's true, if. And he's going to give these conditional statements where these are not automatic things. These are conditional on covenant faithfulness. And these aren't, by the way, arbitrary religious requirements. These are specific markers of justice and compassion. You can kind of weave a thread of that throughout here. And you have this triad that are the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. That's a phrase you see, the triad you see all throughout the Old Testament. You see it in Exodus and Deuteronomy. And that is, it seems to be, that is the test case for whether a society reflects God's character and God's heart. Are you caring for these people who have others, who have no one to care for them? They have no inherent power. They have no legal advocate. They have no economic security. How are you treating these people? And they are completely dependent on the community's righteousness. So if they're not being treated well, it's because the community doesn't have a whole lot of righteousness. Also, look at that phrase, do not shed innocent blood. That is, in the original language, because your head might go, just that's murder. That's not just murder. It is any form of oppression that leads to a destroyed life in the original context there. Also, follow other gods is mentioned there. So this is kind of the fundamental covenant violation, divided loyalty. And also the phrase, to your own harm. Or the original literally says, for evil to yourselves. And what that's showing is that any idolatry that they may have experienced was ultimately incredibly self-destructive idolatry. That they had put something else as a competitor to God. And also that phrase, I will let you live in this place. And that is using this Hebrew verb that means to dwell or to settle. It's the very same word that is used when it has the phrase God's dwelling place. It is this idea of you really make yourself comfortable here. You can be comfortable here if you're reflecting these values that I have. And it is not just their religious attendance that's being asked. It is this justice system that they're supposed to have. All right, so with that in mind, a couple of questions for you. Why do you think the barometer, the litmus test for genuine faith in this case seems to be the treatment of the vulnerable? Why is that a theme here? And we see that repeated in the New Testament. The book of James repeats the same thing.
It's unselfish because they can't give you anything back.
So if the goal of following God is to show humility, then it is an act of humility to serve someone who can't serve you back, right? You benefit in no way from this. Go ahead. So maybe it's because it's requiring something deeper within ourselves to do it that God wants that. Go ahead, Larry. Go ahead. Which I think, is that concept of God's not asking us to do anything He hasn't already done. That He looks out for the powerless. This is God's characteristic, not just in general, but to us, specifically to us. Someone else had their hand up, I thought. Maybe not. I'm debating on whether to ask this next question or not. I guess... Okay, I will ask it. I'm such a sucker. In what ways might churches today be guilty of trusting in religious activity while ignoring the very conditions that God seems to care about? But I'm saying, in what way what does that look like? In other words, if you get this wrong, what does that look like? That's probably a pretty big tell, right? If we are, she said it's probably inward focused as opposed to outward focused. If we become very insular and everything is about for us and to us, that's maybe one indication we're getting this wrong. Yeah. I mean, I can just keep repeating if you like, but... Yeah, so when we start majoring in the minors, we recognize we've gotten this wrong, right?
God wants us obedience. We don't always want all that.
That is one of the themes of this passage, is God is seeking obedience. And He wants that obedience more than ritual, more than sacrifice. It is, I want you to obey. But again, we're talking about how, when we get that wrong, what that looks like. Debbie, did you have another one? It's a little faith crisis moment for you, isn't it? I think that's, again, we could probably talk quite a bit about that little moment and some of the things that go around that. But I want us to think just for a minute about corporately. I want us to think as a gathered body of believers. That's kind of what that Jeremiah is addressing. He's not just addressing individuals as they walk in. He's addressing their corporate identity, their identity as God's people. And he's like, you should have been known for this. You should have been known for looking out for people who can't take care of themselves. That's not what you're known for. And you feel this false sense of security as a result. Let's keep going. Look at verse 8. He says, but look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods as you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, we're safe? Safe? Safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house, which bears my name, become a den of robbers to you? Okay, one thing I think is interesting about his little list here is he's basically ticking off the 10 Commandments. It's like one by one. It is a catalog of sins, which looks like a review from Exodus chapter 20. You've got stealing, that's the 8th commandment. You've got murder, that's the 6th one. Adultery, that's the 7th one. False oaths, that's 3rd and 9th. Idolatry, that's the 1st and the 2nd one. They are systematically violating the core commandments that God had given them, which, by way of review, whenever God gives them this covenant, and he gives them these commandments are so that God can abide with them and live with them without killing them. If you can follow these rules, then we'll be good to go. And these are the basic 10 things. They can't even get these right. But I like the rhetorical question in verse 10. He says, you do all this and then come and stand before me and say, we are safe. That sort of captures the absurdity of their position. And they believe that you remember when you were a little kid and you were playing tag and you had a base? Do you remember that? What was base? Base is, I'm safe. You can't tag me. I'm safe. I'm on base. And that's kind of how they were treating the temple. The temple is, I'm safe. I'm on base here. You can't really touch me. And what's ironic about that is, that was giving them this false sense of security. That is supposed to be a place of worship and transformation, and it's become, a condemnation of their other behaviors here. By the way, that phrase "den of robbers" is interesting as well, because a den is like, that's like a hiding, it's a hideout. Where this is supposed to be this place of transformation and this place of connecting with God, and yet it's a hideout for criminals, basically. And Jesus actually quotes this in Matthew chapter 21. It's also recorded in Mark and Luke as well, Mark chapter 11 and Luke chapter 19. He uses this line, den of thieves. You remember that Jesus said? It's a direct quotation from Jeremiah chapter 7. And he's using it in the same exact context, the corruption of the temple. The temple had become this place of corruption. So here's a fun question. Is there a way today to use church attendance as a hideout from God rather than a place to encounter God? It's the I've checked my attendance. I'm good to go. Where I'm supposed to be connecting with God. I think one way, and I think Mike, you hit on this. One way is when we make worship about us. I was telling someone the other day. I love that we introduce new songs here at Pleasant Ridge. I think it's kind of cool that we are constantly evolving in our hymnology here, and I like the pace that we do it. It's pretty nice that at one point I think Dean was doing about once a month. I think now it's maybe every other month or so. But here's what will happen. This is proof I'm getting older. I go speak at other places, or I go to OC and I go to chapel there. And they're singing the songs that I grew up with, the songs that we sang when I was in the youth group. And I'm like, it's so nice to just know all of these songs. And, I don't have to look at the screen. And it takes me back to when I was at camp, or when I was in youth group, or even when I was worshiping as a teenager here. And it's just stuff I'm comfortable with and familiar with. It's like sitting in your favorite chair, your favorite recliner. It feels really nice. And I told someone recently, I said, but when that happens, I recognize that's just my preference. That's what I like. That doesn't mean that's how it has to be. It's just I recognize this is a place of comfort. So I totally understand when we want to make worship, about what am I getting out of this. But I think that's what, I think we run into dangerous territory when it's all about what am I getting out of this, that it's some sort of judgment about that. I saw a hand go up. Go ahead, Jill.
I would really like to challenge us to reach out from the little groups that we sit with or the friends that we know and make sure that we greet our visitors, even if they're not visitors. They could have been there 10 years and you don't know who they are. This is a big congregation, and it's really easy for people to come here and slip out.
Yeah.
And I think we really should be reaching out, getting to know people, and
I think that's a great point, and it goes to Shauna's point really too, because if you just do that simple thing of looking around, of like who looks like they might be a stranger here, it takes us instantly from inward to outwardly focused without really much of a big change. Someone else had their hand up, I thought. Maybe not. Go ahead.
What we get out of it is directly related to what we put into it. If our heart is in the right place and we go in there, the songs mean more, the prayers mean more. So I think that's true with lots of other things in life, but particularly in worship.
Yeah, and I tell people that during the newcomers lunch, whenever we have our newcomers lunch, I always say that to them. I say, you can come and sit in our pew and, come 5 minutes late, leave 5 minutes early, and probably we're big enough that no one's going to give you too hard of a time about that, but you won't get as much out of it, and that you'll get out what you put into it. Go ahead, Paul.
No, I was saying I think it would be remarkable every 6 months to say fruit basket turnover.
Oh, now you're really asking for it.
I know, but it's amazing. It's amazing how we can sit and we'll know the 15 people around us.
Yeah.
Or we're aware of them.
Yeah. Just don't do that, though. That's going to throw me way off when I'm preaching. And I'm like, why are you over here? And what's happening? And that's going to start a fist fight probably, too, before service even starts. But I do think it's funny because let's be honest. This is an ancient document we're reading this morning with a problem that is an ancient problem. And then we go, but I see this. I see this, how easy this is. It's you create this temple activity, you create this ritual, you create this space, and then you think, this is it. And God's like, that's not it. There's supposed to be some sort of heart change. There's supposed to be something that comes out of this. It's not just about religious activity. And I think we have to be careful that we don't create a space where we are hiding from God's call, but we are calling for transformation. And I will say this is an uncomfortable truth for a preacher, because what that means is it means we're talking about life change week in and week out, that this has to make a difference in our lives. These aren't just truths that we're enjoying and talking about. Let's close it out. Look at verses 21 through 23. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Go ahead, add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifices, and eat the meat yourselves. Okay, you might not catch the irony here, but this is dripping with irony. Burnt offerings are supposed to be completely consumed by fire. Okay, keep that in mind. Let's read it again. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Go ahead and add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifices and eat the meat yourselves. God is saying, you aren't giving these burnt offerings to me anyway, so you might as well just eat them along with all of the other rest of your sacrifices. It's like, hey, if you're gonna, these are empty calories anyway, so go ahead and dig in. And then verse 22, for when I brought your ancestors out of Egypt and spoke to them, I did not just give them commands about burnt offerings and sacrifices. I also gave them this command, obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Again, to Dorothy's point, God's first priority for Israel was always about obedience. The other things, the sacrifice and the priesthood, those are secondary things. It reminds me of a couple getting married, and in preparation of their marriage, they're like, okay, does the toilet paper roll go over or does it go under? All right, what about the toothpaste? Do you roll that up from the bottom, Like, do you squeegee the shower after you're done with it every single time? Or, and do you prefer to eat at 5:30 or maybe a little bit later in the evening? And you're talking about all of these things that you need to agree on, and you're like, wait a second, there's this marriage covenant that's supposed to be really important too. Like, that big thing was supposed to be a part of it. And you skip to these insignificant things. And it's like the people have majored in these other things, sacrifice and priesthood, and God's like, there was supposed to be this major first priority. And when God gave Israel the 10 Commandments, there was nothing in there about sacrifice or priesthood. Those came later after they accepted the covenant, that's how a marriage works, right? We're going to stand in front of God and all these other people and make these promises to each other. That's the foundation. Those vows are the foundation for everything that comes later. Then we're going to figure out the rest. But the formula happens in verse 23. I will be your God and you will be my people. That is not transactional language. That is relational language. And it echoes that marriage covenant where it's personal connection. It's not just ritual performance. And I also love that phrase, that it may go well with you. If I'm highlighting my Bible, there's a phrase I'm highlighting like, I want it to go well for me. So let's figure out what this is all about. And it is key to understanding too. When God says he requires obedience, he's not trying to make our life miserable. I'm not making this point because I want you to be miserable. I want you to flourish. These commands are for your own good. And so, again, I think that the warning here as we're out of time is we have to be very careful we're not performing religious duties and rituals that are empty. And we have to understand as well that there is some of this that we need to shift into, this is for my own good. All right, I have some applications I want to leave you with, kind of back pocket stuff here. One is we need to audit our security sources. I think, what do we take security in? What do we find comfort in? What, when it gets threatened, do we feel incredibly insecure about? And if it's church attendance, if it's Bible knowledge, if it's Christian friends, if it's ministry involvement, those scare me a little bit, because what it really needs to be is a relationship with God. And so it is, what are you trusting for your spiritual security? Then the other thing that we need to do is we need to, I think, take stock of our temple words. We need to think about our religious language, or maybe beliefs or phrases even that we repeat as a function of false assurances. A phrase like, God won't let that happen. God won't let that happen. Dangerous phrases that we maybe find security in. Also, we have to test our religion by the vulnerable. This criteria that he uses here, people who have no power, the marginalized. And we have to have a religious activity that leads to supporting those people who have no power. We also have to move from performance to presence, where, am I doing this to check a box, or am I doing this to encounter God? And then finally, I think there's some honest confession that has to happen here, where am I using something as a hideout, as a hideout for actual life change. Let's close out with a prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for the power of your word, and we acknowledge the relevancy of it in our lives. I can't imagine, Lord, what it was like to be Jeremiah and step into that gate and say these things. And we just pray, Lord, that you'll give us the same courage to not only do this here, but in our own lives, Lord, to have some introspection here. Help us to look out for the vulnerable. Help us to rid our language of empty ritual phrases, Lord. We pray that we can have a right relationship with you, and one that does obey. We pray all this in Christ. Amen. All right. For my class, we will still be in Jeremiah next week, so...